All right, folks, so this is the guided program development video for Chapter 9, the ASP.NET Web Applications chapter. And as I mentioned in the presentation video, I'm going to be diverting a little bit from the book. We won't be using the templates. I'll just be starting the page from scratch. You probably won't notice a difference because I don't think anyone is using the books to create these guided program development. They're using my videos entirely. So just follow along. It should be pretty straightforward. So the first thing we're going to do is go out to my flash drive, Visual Basic, create a new folder for Chapter 9. That was interesting. Odd message, but it looks like it created my folder. All right. So now we will start Visual Studio. And these first couple steps when we're creating this new project are a little bit important because we're not going to be creating Visual Basic Windows Forms app. We're going to be creating ASP.NET Web Applications. So we'll create a new project just like the way we normally would, but rather than selecting Windows Desktop application and Windows Form here, we are going to actually click on Web under Visual Basic and make sure you're selecting ASP.NET Web Applications. And then we're going to give it a name, and the book wants us to call it glamping. So okay, so we've got everything. We've got a folder, creating a directory. So most of this is the same. Just you want to make sure you're picking the ASP.NET Web Application. We'll hit OK, and then we're prompted with this this new form, whether we want to use a template for the type of web app we're going to create. And we're going to make sure we select empty here, and then select the web forms selection. I'm not sure we need to select this, but just in case we want to use any advanced features of web forms, we'll click it off. It's going to make a bunch of folders for us that we might not need, but we'll put it in there anyway. Okay, then we hit OK. And you'll notice what appears in the Solution Explorer is pretty significantly different than what we've been dealing with our Windows Forms apps. The toolbar will look the same. We'll still have the Properties window, but there'll be a couple additional things for us to deal with here. Okay, so we've got here our solution glamping that we created. And we have to create our actual first page. So we're going to go to Project, and we're going to add a new item, and we're going to add a web form. Okay. And we're going to rename this web form. I think it's a registration page. So let's just rename this to registration. Spell it right. Okay. So we have our registration, and you'll notice that these pages no longer have a VB extension. They have an ASPX extension. And if we click on the page, we get HTML. And this should look fairly familiar to you. We've got a body, we've got a head, we've got a title, and everything else you would have in an HTML page. If we used a template, there would be a whole bunch of other stuff in here that we'd have to delete and add and be careful about. So this makes it a lot easier for us as we're going about this. So the first thing we're going to do, I'll give you a little overview. If we hit design, this is what our page looks like. Doesn't look like much now because we haven't put any content in there. We'll split the screen so we can see the source code and the page, and then we can just switch back to source. So the first thing we want to do is put a title into this. So the title it wants us to give us is Moonbeam Glamping. So let's put that in there. Okay. And then let's go to our design. And I think what we want to do, go back to our source and go into the body, and let's put a header in there, a heading. We'll do an H1 slash H1. And put this again in as Moonbeam. So we have a heading in there. We put it in as H1. So when we look at the design, we should see a big moonbeam clamping in there. Okay. So we've got our page title. And if we want here, we can change the style. Oops. Back to that style. You can change the font style of that header, font weight, font size, font family. So maybe we make it Arial or something to stay away from the basic fonts. All right, so let's see what else we need to do here. So the first thing it wants us to do is add an image. Okay, so images are a little funky with ASP.NET because we have to make the images part of the application, just like VB.NET applications, but you're actually going to be publishing them to the website. The way the book actually tells you to add an image in is to pull it down from their website. It gives a URL link to the image that it wants us to use. But when I went over and played with it earlier, that image didn't exist. So I had to create my own image. So what we're going to do is we're going to go back out to our flash drive and go to our Visual Basic folder, Chapter 9, Glamping, over here. And we're going to create a new folder in here. And we're going to call it Images. For some reason, new. There we go. I'm getting a little delay when I'm creating folders here, and I'm not sure why. So let's create a folder called Images. And I downloaded an image of a tent because that's what glamping is, glamorous camping. So I'm going to go over to my desktop and my resources folder in Chapter 9. You won't have this image in here. I downloaded this. You can go out on the web and download a temp folder to where just so you see how to add images into a website. And it's not as simple as we would like it to be, but I'll show you how to do that. So I just copied that image from my folder. You can download it directly into your images folder that you create. I'm going to paste that in there. So now I have a new folder in my directory called images, and in that image I have a JPEG of a tent. So now I'll close this and go back to my app. I have to add that folder into my solution. So I'm going to add an existing item, images, and did it add it? Added it, but it didn't add it in an images folder. That's okay for now. I'd like to see an images folder here. It is actually in the images folder. I'd like it to be shown in the images folder, but that's okay. We have our image there. So the first thing we're going to do is go over here and we are going to look for an image. Okay. So our image object, we're going to double click that and it's going to put an image right here. I'm going to click on that and I'm going to call this, I'm going to change the name of it from image one to IMG logo. So we give it a nice naming convention. And I'm going to change the size of it. So the image height, I'm going to change that to 150 pixels and the width to 150 pixels, just so it has a little bit of size to it. Okay, and then we're going to change the image URL and we're going to browse out and it should show us our clamping tent. Hit OK. So now this image is part of our application. Okay, so we've got an image in our web page. And if we run this previously, and I like to run my applications pretty frequently just to make sure I'm not having any issues so I can correct the issues right away. If I run this application, I should just see this, and it's not actually going to create an executable. It's going to actually create an HTML5. It's going to run in a kind of a mini web server that it creates on our PC. So you can see here it says IIS Express in Google Chrome. Google Chrome is my default browser, so it'll run on there. So I'm going to just click on Run just to make sure everything is looking okay. And it takes a little while to spin up this web server, but it should open up Chrome, which it looks like it's doing. And we have Moonbeam Glamping and our image. Okay, so that's pretty much what we want. So this looks like we're doing okay so far. All right. So the next thing we want to do, I'm going to go back to my source here. And I want to make sure I'm doing everything in my form. So you got to be careful about just dragging images in anywhere because you want to make sure everything's inside your form, which is inside your body. So we're just going to put a little description in here, and I want to put that in a paragraph tag. Click inside that, and we can do this back in our source. So this is going to say nestled in the mountain. I need to spell right. Mountain woods surrounding the moon name our glamping retreat provides modern comfort, genuine resort elegance. Offering the sights and sounds of nature. Okay. We've got our image, we've got our title, and we've got our little description of what our glamping is all about. So that's good. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to work on building our form. Now, if you were building a regular web page, you would be doing this, the formatting and everything with HTML and CSS. You can do that with ASP, but for our purposes this time, it would just be a little more complicated. I really don't want to get into that. The book doesn't get into it because it's more complicated. Before I do that, though, I want to change the font of that paragraph. So I'm going to go back to style and make the font family Arial for that one too. All right. So we've got that. So what we do for formatting to make things easier for us is we format using tables. So rather than using absolute and relative positionings, we'll make a grid and we'll put our objects inside the grid for layouts. And that makes it easier when we're resizing our forms and everything. Not the best way to do things, but for our purposes here, it's going to make things easier for us. Okay, so we are going to insert a table. So we're going to click here. We're going to click below where our description was and go to table and insert table. And our table is going to be 7 rows. So I'm going to change this to 7 and 3 columns. Okay, hit OK. And we've now got 3 column or 7 column, no, 3 column, 7 row table. And it wants us to change the size of the columns. So first column, 150 pixels. So it's kind of small. I'm not going to make it that small. In the second column, 250 pixels. That's pretty small too. Let's see if we can resize this one a little bit. All right, so we got a 3 column table. Something else I didn't mention that I'm sure you've noticed, we're not using labels for our text. We're just using straight HTML. And that's going to make things load a lot faster for us. We can't style it like we would a label, but on a web page, it's going to be a lot easier. So the first thing we're going to do in separate rows is we're going to put a bunch of labels for our objects we're going to put in here. So basically what this application is someone's booking a tent or a series of tents for a number of nights, and they're going to enter their name, email address, number of nights, what tent they want, all in here. So here, first thing they're entering is their name and then their email address. And then tent selection. And then nights. So we can have one or more nights. And then we have check-in date. Okay, is that it? I think that's it. So we've got a couple extra columns down here, or extra rows down here for probably for our buttons and stuff like that we add later. And I think probably for our validation controls. So the first thing we're going to do is add a text box for name. So we're going to grab a text box. Actually, I think if we just click here and then double click on text box, it'll add it in there for us. So that's good. We can make it a little bigger. And then just like everything else, we want to give this a name. So this is txt name. Okay, that's good. And then next one is email address. So I'm going to click on that column. I'm going to double click text box again. We'll make this a little bigger. And we're going to name this one to text email. Good. And that selection. We're going to add actually 3 text boxes in here. So where is my checkbox? There we go. So add 1 text box, another text box, and another text box. So I think if I go in here and hit the enter key, I can get these. Oops. Don't want to do that yet. Checkbox 1, checkbox 2, and checkbox 3. Okay, so I got my 3 text boxes. So the first one is going to be, these are our names of our tents. So CHK Grizzly. And we're going to change the text property of this. So if I didn't mention it before, I don't think we've used checkboxes. We use option buttons. So the naming convention for a checkbox is CHK. And we're going to change the text property of this. There's no text property in there right now. To Grizzly Suite, $99. Okay. So that changes the label next to the checkbox there. We'll go to our next one. So our next one is Polar. So we'll go and we'll change the name of this to CHK Polar. And we'll change the text property to Polar. and parentheses. This is deluxe plus cut. $89. And then our last one is Kodiak. So we'll name this to K Kodiak. And we're going to change the name or the text to Kodiak Deluxe. So $9. We go from the most expensive tent to the cheapest tent that we can buy. So $99 for a tent seems pretty expensive, but who am I to judge? All right, so the next thing we're going to add is a drop-down object list. So this is another new object that we haven't used before. So I'll just click on that column in the table and double click on drop-down list. It'll add a drop-down there for us. Okay. And how does it want us to add objects to this list? So we can just click on edit items here. And we are going to add one. Oops. Let's go back to that. So we're looking for the items collection. I'm going to add 2. Three. So we're basically adding 1 through 7. So the number of nights that we can rent for. So we'll just go through and keep adding values. It's a little hokey to add values in here. You think you want to hit OK. You just keep hitting add. It'll add a new value in there. Whoops, I missed this one. So I want to give this a value of 5. This is a value of 6. And this is a value of 7. And we'll hit OK. And this drop-down list, can't see it now, but if I run it, we'll see what this looks like a little better. All right, so we got our text box for our name, text box for our email address. That's interesting. Check boxes, and then our drop down with 1 through 7 for a number of nights. So it looks like this is working out okay so far. I think that little red target that we're seeing has something to do with Screencastify, what I'm using to record this. All right, so that is it for a drop down. So the last thing we need to add is our calendar object. So we'll grab a calendar object. I'm actually just gonna already clicked in there, double click on the calendar object. And we're going to give this a name of, what does it want to name this? CLD. So the naming convention for a calendar is CLD. and arrival. Actually, I forgot, I think, to name my drop-down list. Let's go back to that step. Let's see. This is supposed to be drop-down list nights. So drop-down list is DDL nights. Sorry about that. Okay, so click back on this. So we click on the smart tag. That's this little arrow here. And we click on auto format, and we want to change the format to colorful one. Oh, isn't that nice? And hit apply. And okay, so that gives us this nice colorful little calendar that'll let us select a date. So that is it for the objects we're adding. So the next thing we need to add is our validation controls. Okay, so the first thing we want to do is add a required field validation object. So all our toolbox items here are just standard toolbox items that look very familiar to our Windows Forms controls. So now we're going to be adding in some validation controls. So these are our validation controls that I mentioned in the video. So the first one we're going to add is a required field validator. Okay. So, and we're going to add it for the name because we want them to actually enter the name. And I'm just going to double click on that. And it'll put my required field validator into this column here. And we want to change its name or its ID. Yeah, so that's kind of another little different thing here. You're used to seeing name here and its ID with ASP.NET. So we're going to change its name or its ID to RFV. Oops, RFV name. Okay, and should have an error message property. Yeah, and we're going to change this to star enter name. And then we have to tie this to the text box we want to validate. So the control we want to validate is text name here. Okay, so that's the important thing that ties this validation control to this text box. So if the user didn't put anything in here, we get this gets displayed. It doesn't let you go any further. Okay. So next, we're going to add another required field validator to our email. Okay. So I'll just double click on this again. And we're going to call this RFV email. And we'll scroll down, change the error message to enter a valid email. And then in our control to validate, we're going to just get our text email. to add, in this one as well, we're going to add a expression validator. Okay, so we have actually, I think we can. Yep, so we're going to add this regular expression validator in here. And change the ID to REV. So REV for regular expression validator email. And we're going to change the error message to error in email format. And then the control to validate, text email. And then we want to go to the validation expression property. And here, and there's an ellipsis, and we click on that. There should be a control for internet email address. Okay, so this is the expression validator that's looking to make sure that there is an @ in there and a .com. And if we look at this, it's probably a whole bunch of other stuff in here. I'm not actually even sure what this is doing, but it looks like it's looking for a dot and some other things. So we'll just assume that this is going to work properly for that. Okay. So for the 10 selection message, we're not actually going to use a validator in there because of the text boxes. So we're actually going to use just a label for this one. So we're going to go back to our standard toolbox and we're going to throw a label in here. Okay, and we're going to call this LBL tent error. And we're going to change the text property from label to select attempt. And we're going to make the visible property on this false because we don't want it to be displayed unless there actually is an error. So now we're going to add a submit button. For some reason, we don't have a validation control for the number of nights, but I think it's defaulting to 1 if you don't select anything. So I think that's okay. Next thing we're going to do is add a submit button. So we're going to drag a button on here. I don't like how it's putting the button all the way at the bottom. So I think we're going to change the style of this. And I think we can change alignment somewhere in here. Layout. And we could change this to top. Hopefully that'll do it. No, didn't do it. Let's try that again. Styles, font style, font weight, font family, table now, display. Position. Let's try that. Yeah, well, I guess we get our button in the middle. That's fine. We can fix that later if we need to. As we add more things in, it'll move up if we fill it up. All right, so we want to create, next we want to create, we have to name our button. Sorry about that. So this is going to be BTN submit. And we'll change our text property to submit. And we're going to add a couple labels in here. For our results. So this label, call this calendar error, LBL. Calendar error. And the text property is going to be select valid date. So it says the user didn't select anything. Okay. And then we're going to add a results label. Put another label in there. Results. And what are we going to put for a property for this? So this is just a placeholder for displaying our results. And we don't want any text in this one. All right. Actually, this is supposed to be label reservation, not label results. I'm sorry about that. All right. So that's it for our form. So as you can see, it's a little bit hokier than doing Windows forms. Not too bad though. The next thing we're going to do, and this is actually start adding our code, and that should be more familiar with you. So I'm going to stop this video now, and the next video is going to be when we add the code. And this is a pretty simple app, so doesn't look like there's a whole lot of code in this one. Looking at 65 lines of code, so nothing too bad. But I'm gonna do that in a separate video for you. So I will see you in the next video.